Hello everyone, and welcome to Capitol Watch for Friday, January 10th, the first edition of Capitol Watch for 2014 as the legislative session began earlier this week. And joining me to discuss pending legislative issues that have an impact on elementary and secondary education in our state is Mike Grote, MSBA's Governmental Relations Consultant. And Mike, thanks a lot for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
As I said, Mike, the session began on Wednesday of this week. Tell us about the makeup of the General Assembly this session. It's really not a lot different from last year, is it?
So this is the second term of this legislature. So yeah, the makeup's the same. Committees are mostly the same. You'll see a little bit of change in appointments, maybe a committee chairman or two, but pretty much the same, other than the fact we do have some vacancies due to people who have taken other jobs or appointments by the governor. So, but right now we still have a very large majority in both the House and the Senate. The only real difference being is that the House has lost their supermajority, and they're below, or the Republicans have lost that supermajority, so they're down below what it would take to do an override of the governor.
Mm-hmm. One of the events, of course, that happened this week, Mike, was the opening day speech by House Speaker Tim Jones, and he covered a couple of issues at least that we were interested in. Tell us about that speech and what he talked about.
Sure. It's your standard opening speech where he tries to highlight some of the items that are important to him and what he will have the House focusing on during that year. And he kind of did this message of 4 Gs, and he had growth as being one of them. Inside of that, he talked about taxes, and that's very important to us, and what we saw happen last year and how that tax bill came out. And it looks like that's still going to be a focus of what the legislature, or at least the House, is going to try to do this year. Along with the other big issue that's of concern to us is how to deal with some education issues, which are always at the forefront.
Mm-hmm. And one of the issues he talked about, Mike, was the student transfer law, and there's been a lot of discussion about that given what's going on in the St. Louis area and what might happen in the Kansas City area about fixing that law, but the Speaker indicated he's not too interested in fixing the law. Is that right?
Well, I think what we've seen from both the House and the Senate over these last few months, clearly in St. Louis, there's definitely been changes. And both you have leadership from the House and the Senate that are from the St. Louis area. And I think both of them are actually kind of on a similar path in that they support what we currently have, some sort of transfer, but they appreciate that there's some very problematic issues with the logistics and how it's going to work, how it's affecting sending districts, how it's affecting receiving districts, and coming up with some sort of a solution that makes it better. I think you'll see both the House and the Senate, though, are kind of on this path of we want to clean it up, not get rid of it.
Mm-hmm. So you think the Speaker is open to some changes?
I've seen some comments that he's made that lead us to believe that he's willing to deal with logistical issues, but not structural changes to the way the law was passed.
All right. And the Senate President Pro Tem, Tom Dempsey, did not give a speech to the Senate during the opening day, but he did have some comments for reporters. And he made some comments regarding the student transfer issue. And let's take a look at those right now.
First and foremost, in addition to passing the budget, we'll be addressing the school transfer issue. And I think philosophically, we believe that every child deserves access to a quality education. I think under most circumstances, we prefer that to be in the communities in which those children live. And as I've witnessed and participated in debates in education in my past 13 years, we've not done anything really substantive until we've been compelled by the courts to act. And I think this is another situation where we are compelled to act, much like we needed to address the Second Injury Fund.
So clearly, Mike, the student transfer fix is a priority for Senator Dempsey. Is that correct?
I think you see it as definitely a priority in the Senate. He's made that very well known that there's definitely some concerns, some issues that have to be cleared up, definitely have to be fixed, and the Senate will probably make that a priority.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned earlier the tax cut issue, and certainly that was something that we were concerned about last year and all the way up through the veto session that occurred in September, and clearly that issue is going to be back on the front burner again. Are there differences between the House and the Senate approach on tax cuts?
I'm still trying to digest exactly how those are written. And last year's bill was so complex, so complicated. I'm not sure anybody even understood it, even on the day of passage. Maybe even the people who wrote it didn't have a complete understanding of it. The two things that we're seeing right now, Will Krause, who was a sponsor of one of the pieces of legislation last year in the Senate, has put forth, I believe it's Senate Bill 509 this year. which I think is going to be probably the Senate vehicle, simply because he was the sponsor last year. And then we've also seen Representative Berry on the House side of the building. It's HB 1253. And those are probably going to be what the vehicles will look like. And the differences between the two, one is focusing, the Senate bill is focusing primarily on personal income tax and finding a way to reduce the largest, or the highest bracket on the personal income tax. What you're seeing from the House version of the bill deals both with corporate as well as personal income tax. So that's kind of the big difference right now in exactly how those bracketings work. One is set for a 5-year phase-in, one looks more like a 3-year phase-in at this point in time. And as you know, the legislature is where everybody throws their ideas into the pot and they simmer together, and we come up with a dinner at the end of the day. So.
And our concern, again, Mike, of course, will be concerns with a tax cut bill that might reduce state revenue that's available to fund education. So we'll be watching that.
We'll definitely be watching that. And I think both these bills, I think everybody in the legislature recognizes that last year was potentially an overstep, and that's why you're seeing these bills this year. Both of them, I think, were about 5 pages in length versus, last year we were dealing with 100-page documents. And so they're trying to make something that's much more simple, that is going to be a tax cut to the middle class, but at the same time isn't going to be a detriment to those of us that need state funds.
Another issue that's likely to come up, Mike, has to do with the school calendar. We have a bill on that from Representative Cookson, and what's that all about?
So Representative Cookson's bill does 2 things right now. One, it addresses the calendar in that it makes the start date, can't start any earlier than September 1, and you have to conclude the school year by May 30th. The other thing it does is it also increases the number of hours that have to be taught during the school year. So those are the 2 items that he's focusing on his bill, and he's put it out there. I think he recognizes there's definitely going to be some resistance to that, and I've even commented to him on how do we balance we don't want schools to be in session, but at the same time we want you guys to achieve your results. And so it's that balance that I think we're all looking at to make sure that students are getting the proper education they need.
And from our perspective, Mike, of course, we're trying to retain flexibility at the local level in terms of setting the school calendar.
Exactly. And the legislation that we have out there right now, the changes we made a few years ago, completely vests the authority in the local community and says you can start whenever you want to, just as long as you have that public meeting beforehand, make the announcement, make it known, and go through a public vetting process, which is complete local control. And it's disappointing to see that we're getting away from a local control model.
Let's talk about funding, Mike, and the governor is coming up with his budget recommendations here in a few weeks with his State of the State address and budget proposals that he'll be releasing, and he has indicated a fairly significant increase in the foundation formula in his proposed budget. We don't know how much yet, but what's the outlook for funding?
So the outlook for funding right now is pretty good. We've seen over the last let's call it 4 or 5 years, that Missouri has been cutting its budget drastically. This could be, last year it began, this could be the first full budget cycle that we've seen where the state actually has some surplus funds. And those surplus funds could be as much as about $600 million in terms of what the state is bringing in versus what some of our expenses are. And so that gives us the ability to maybe get some of those increases back into the budget that we've had in the past, and hopefully the governor won't withhold funds like he's done in the past.
And so everyone will be paying attention to that State of the State address, won't they?
Very much so.
All right.
And that's the 21st of this month.
Right,
so.
Right. So as the legislature begins its work during the coming week, Mike, what can we expect? Will hearings start this soon?
Actually, this being the second term, hearings have already started. We're posted up for Monday to start having hearings. The first hearing that's of importance to us is on Wednesday. The Joint Education Committee is having a meeting and reviewing some charter school issues. So that's the first real education hearing that's out there, though.
All right. Mike Groth, thanks very much for being with us, and good luck in your work with the legislature this coming session. And we want to remind you that we'll be keeping you up to date on legislative issues through this program, which is posted every Friday during the session. Also, our Legislative Voice electronic newsletter that you receive in your email. And we also have daily updates on the front page of our website, and we urge you to read those and keep up with what's going on in the Missouri General Assembly. Thanks for joining us on this edition of MSBA's Capitol Watch.